My parents made me sit alone in the rain at my own sister's wedding, while everyone else laughed, smiled, and pretended I didn't exist. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. My name is Rachel Miller. I'm married to my husband, Daniel Miller, and this is the story of the day I finally understood where I stood in my own family. Growing up, I was always the older one who was expected to understand, adjust, and stay quiet. My younger sister, Emily, was the center of everything. If she wanted something, my parents found a way. If I needed something, I was told to wait or handle it myself. I tried not to let it bother me. I focused on school, on work, and later on building a life with Daniel. He treated me with kindness and respect in a way I had never felt before. Being with him made me believe that maybe my childhood didn't define my worth. I thought that when Emily got married, things would finally feel normal, like we were a real family standing together. The wedding was outdoors, set in a beautiful open space. White chairs were neatly arranged under tents, and everyone was dressed perfectly. When Daniel and I arrived, I was already nervous, but I kept smiling. I didn't want to cause any trouble. I just wanted to support my sister and be there like a good daughter. That's when one of the staff members walked up to me and quietly pointed toward a single chair placed far from the main seating area. It wasn't under any cover. I looked around, confused, thinking it had to be a mistake. My parents were sitting in the front row, dry and comfortable. Emily was laughing with her friends. No one was looking at me. I asked if I could sit with the family, but I was told those seats were already arranged. Before I could say anything else, it started raining. Not a light drizzle, but steady rain. I stood there for a moment, hoping someone would notice and speak up for me. No one did. So I sat down. I felt the rain soak through my dress and into my skin. People glanced at me, then looked away. My parents didn't move. They didn't wave me over. They didn't even look concerned. In that moment, I felt smaller than I ever had before. It wasn't just about the rain. It was the clear message that I didn't matter enough to protect. Daniel stood beside me, silent but tense. I could feel his anger, even though he didn't say a word. I kept my head down, my hands shaking, telling myself to get through it. That day wasn't just my sister's wedding. It was the day my family showed me, in front of everyone, exactly who they valued, and who they didn't. Looking back, the wedding day didn't come out of nowhere. It was only the clearest example of something that had been happening my whole life. Ever since we were kids, my parents made it clear that Emily came first. Not by saying it out loud, but by the way they acted every single day. On my birthdays, I was told to be grateful for simple things. A small cake, a quick dinner, maybe a card. When Emily's birthday came, the house filled with decorations, gifts, and excitement. If I ever looked disappointed, my parents would say I was being selfish. They told me I was older and should understand. When it was time for college, I worked part-time and took loans. I remember sitting at the kitchen table, explaining how hard it was, how stressed I felt. My parents listened, nodded, and then told me I'd figure it out because I was strong. A year later, Emily chose a school she loved, and my parents found the money without hesitation. They called it an investment in her future. Emotionally, it was the same pattern. If Emily cried, everyone rushed to comfort her. If I cried, I was told to calm down and not make a scene. When I tried to talk about feeling ignored, my parents said I was too sensitive. Over time, I learned to keep things inside. I learned that being quiet caused fewer problems. By the time I met Daniel, I didn't expect much from anyone anymore. I was used to handling things on my own. On our first few dates, I was surprised by how closely he listened. He remembered small details. He noticed when I was tired or upset, even when I tried to hide it. That was new to me. When we got married, something shifted inside me. For the first time, I felt like someone had chosen me without conditions. Daniel didn't compare me to anyone. He didn't ask me to be less or wait my turn. He made me feel safe, like I mattered just as much as anyone else. I still tried to keep peace with my parents. I told myself they loved me in their own way. I hoped that as adults, Emily and I could finally be equals. I believed that big moments, like weddings and family gatherings, would bring us closer instead of pushing us apart. But deep down, the old habits never really changed. I was still expected to be flexible. Still expected to understand. Still expected to put my feelings aside so everything could stay smooth for everyone else. Marrying Daniel showed me what real support looked like. It also quietly showed me what I had been missing all those years. I didn't realize it then, but that difference would soon become impossible to ignore. When Emily announced her engagement to Jason Carter, everyone acted like it was the happiest news in the world. My parents were overjoyed. They talked about venues, colors, and guests as if nothing else mattered. I smiled and congratulated her, even though a part of me felt uneasy. Big moments in our family rarely went well for me. A few weeks later, my mother called me about the wedding. Her tone was calm but firm, the way it always was when rules were coming. She said I was, of course, invited, but then she started listing things I needed to remember. She told me not to draw attention to myself, not to say anything that could upset Emily, and to sit wherever the planners directed me. She ended the call by saying I should be grateful to be included and not make things difficult. I held the phone in my hand after the call ended, feeling that familiar tightness in my chest. It wasn't really an invitation. It felt more like a warning. I told myself I was overthinking it, that weddings were stressful and emotions were high. I didn't want to believe my own family would treat me unfairly on such an important day. When I told Daniel about the call, he didn't hide his reaction. He frowned and asked why my own parents were talking to me like I was a problem that needed to be managed. He said it didn't sound right and that I didn't deserve to be spoken to that way. I could tell he was already upset on my behalf. I asked him to let it go. I told him I didn't want any conflict, especially not before the wedding. I said Emily had probably put a lot of pressure on them, and I didn't want to be blamed for ruining anything. Daniel looked at me for a long moment, then nodded, even though I knew he wasn't convinced. As the wedding got closer, the small details kept reminding me of my place. I wasn't asked for my opinion on anything. I wasn't included in family discussions or plans. When I reached out with simple questions, the answers were short and cold. I kept telling myself it was fine. I focused on being supportive and staying out of the way. Daniel stayed quiet like I asked, but I noticed him paying attention. He watched how people spoke to me, how decisions were made without me, and how easily my feelings were dismissed. He didn't argue or interfere, but I could see that he was taking mental notes. By the time the wedding day arrived, I had already lowered my expectations. All I wanted was to attend peacefully, celebrate my sister, and leave without causing any trouble. I didn't realize then that those conditions were only the beginning, and that staying quiet wouldn't protect me the way I hoped it would. The wedding day arrived with dark clouds hanging low in the sky. The ceremony was set outside, and rows of chairs were arranged neatly on the grass. Most of them were covered by white tents, placed carefully to protect the guests. Daniel and I arrived on time, dressed neatly, trying to blend in and not draw attention. As soon as we checked in, an usher approached me and asked me to follow him. I assumed he was taking us to the family section. Instead, he led me past the covered seating and toward the back. There, a single chair stood alone, uncovered, facing the ceremony from a distance. Daniel stopped walking and asked if there had been a mistake. The usher looked uncomfortable but said he was only following instructions. I stood there for a moment, confused and embarrassed. I looked around, hoping someone would notice and correct it. My parents were already seated in the front, under the tent, dry and comfortable. Emily was busy with her bridal party. No one came over. Before I could say anything else, the first drops of rain began to fall. Daniel offered to bring me to sit with him somewhere else, but I shook my head. I didn't want to cause a scene. I walked over and sat down in the chair, trying to keep my composure. The rain grew heavier within minutes. My hair and clothes became wet, and the cold seeped into my body. People turned their heads to look at me, some whispering, others quickly looking away. I felt exposed, like I didn't belong there at all. Daniel went to my parents and asked if I could be moved under the tent. My mother barely looked at him. She said it wasn't the time and that we shouldn't ruin Emily's day. My father agreed and told him to let it go. Daniel came back to me, his face tight with anger, but he didn't argue further. I sat there as the ceremony continued. My hands shook from the cold, and my chest felt heavy. I tried to focus on my breathing, to disappear into myself. No one offered me a coat. No one suggested switching seats. It felt like I was invisible, even though I was sitting in plain sight. The rain soaked through my dress and pooled at my feet. Each passing minute felt longer than the last. I kept telling myself to endure it, that it would be over soon. Inside, something was breaking. It wasn't just the discomfort or the stares. It was the clear message that my comfort didn't matter. When the ceremony finally ended, people stood up and hurried toward dry areas, laughing and chatting. I stood slowly, drenched and exhausted, realizing that this wasn't an accident or a misunderstanding. It was a choice that had been made, and I was the one left sitting in it. After the ceremony ended, people started moving around, smiling and congratulating the couple. I stayed where I was for a moment, trying to steady myself. My clothes were heavy with water, and I felt cold down to my bones. Daniel stood close to me, his jaw tight, his eyes watching everything. That was when I noticed Jason, the groom. He was greeting guests, shaking hands, enjoying the attention. As he turned, his eyes landed on me. For a brief second, our eyes met. Instead of surprise or concern, he gave a small smile. It wasn't kind or awkward. It was sharp. A smirk. Like he was satisfied with what he was seeing. I looked away quickly, telling myself I was imagining things. I didn't want to believe he could be that cruel. Daniel noticed it too. He leaned toward me and asked quietly if I had seen Jason's expression. I nodded but said nothing. I felt embarrassed even talking about it. Later, as guests gathered near the reception area, Jason walked past us with a drink in his hand. He stopped briefly and looked at me from head to toe. Then he said, in a low voice, that I probably heard only because I was standing so close, "Some people just don't fit the picture, you know." He smiled again and walked away before I could respond. I stood there frozen. The words hit harder than the rain ever did. It wasn't just rude. It was deliberate. Daniel turned to me immediately and asked what Jason had said. When I told him, I saw something change in his eyes. The confusion disappeared, replaced by clarity. Daniel didn't raise his voice. He didn't chase after Jason. He simply nodded, like a puzzle piece had finally clicked into place. He said quietly that this wasn't an accident. This wasn't poor planning or a seating mix-up. This was intentional. As we moved into the reception area, Daniel watched Jason closely. He noticed how Jason laughed with my parents, how comfortable he was, how confident. There was no sign of regret or concern on his face. He acted like everything had gone exactly as planned. I tried to focus on getting through the evening. I dried off as best I could and stayed close to Daniel. But inside, I felt exposed and small. Jason's comment replayed in my head again and again. Not fitting the picture. It made me realize that I hadn't just been ignored. I had been placed where I was meant to be seen and judged. Daniel stayed calm, but I could tell he was done giving anyone the benefit of the doubt. He squeezed my hand and told me I didn't deserve any of this. He said nothing else, but I knew he was thinking deeply. That was the moment everything shifted. What I thought was careless behavior was now clearly something else. The rain, the seat, the silence from my parents, and Jason's smirk all pointed to the same truth. This humiliation wasn't a mistake. It was planned, accepted, and quietly approved by the people who were supposed to protect me. The reception hall was warm and bright, a sharp contrast to how I felt inside. People laughed, music played softly, and glasses clinked as everyone found their seats. Daniel and I followed the place cards, expecting that at least now I would be seated with family. Instead, my name was placed at a small table near the side of the room, close to where staff were moving in and out with trays of food. There were no family members at the table. No familiar faces. Just empty chairs and the quiet hum of the service area behind me. Daniel pulled out a chair and sat beside me without saying a word. I could tell he was holding back, choosing his next steps carefully. As dinner began, my mother walked past our table. I looked up at her, hoping she might stop, maybe say something kind or at least explain. She glanced at me, sighed, and leaned in just enough for me to hear her. She told me I needed to stop being dramatic and enjoy the evening like everyone else. Then she walked away. That was it. No apology. No concern. No acknowledgement of what had already happened. I felt my chest tighten, and tears filled my eyes. I kept my head down, staring at my plate, trying not to let anyone see. I didn't want to give them another reason to blame me. Daniel noticed immediately. He placed his hand over mine and asked softly if I was okay. I shook my head but couldn't bring myself to speak at first. When I finally did, my voice was low and unsteady. I told him where I was seated, what my mother had said, and how alone I felt in a room full of people. Daniel listened without interrupting. He didn't try to fix it right away or tell me to calm down. He let me talk, even when my words came out broken. I felt the tears slip down my face, and I wiped them away quickly, hoping no one would notice. After a moment, Daniel asked me a few quiet questions. He asked who decided the seating. He asked if this had been discussed before the wedding. He asked whether anyone had checked on me during the ceremony or afterward. His tone was calm, but his focus was intense. I answered honestly. I told him I didn't know who made the final decisions. I told him no one had checked on me. I told him this felt planned, like I was placed exactly where they wanted me. Daniel nodded slowly, taking it all in. He looked around the room, observing how my parents interacted with the groom, how relaxed and comfortable they seemed. He didn't look angry anymore. He looked thoughtful. I tried to eat but couldn't. My appetite was gone, replaced by a deep ache in my chest. I felt humiliated all over again, not just by where I was sitting, but by how easily my feelings were dismissed. Daniel stayed close, saying little, watching everything. I didn't know what he was thinking, but I knew he was paying attention in a way no one else ever had. And for the first time that night, I felt like I wasn't completely alone anymore. After dinner plates were cleared, Daniel leaned closer to me and spoke in a low voice. He told me there was something I needed to know, something he hadn't mentioned before because he didn't think it mattered. At least, not until now. He said he recognized Jason the moment he saw him at the ceremony. At first, he wasn't sure from where, but as the day went on, it became clear. Daniel explained that Jason worked for a company connected to his own business. Not as a partner. Not as a manager. As an employee. I looked at Daniel, confused, and asked him what he meant. He explained slowly, making sure I understood. Daniel partially owned a larger firm that had several smaller companies under it. Jason worked at one of those companies in a mid-level role. He had no real authority and no decision-making power. Daniel told me that from the way Jason spoke to my parents and Emily, it was obvious he had been exaggerating his position. Jason had been presenting himself as far more important than he actually was. He had talked like he was in charge, like he was wealthy, like he had influence. Daniel knew those details weren't true. He said Jason's actual income was modest. Comfortable, maybe, but nothing close to what he had been claiming. The lifestyle Jason described to my family didn't match his real situation. Daniel had seen his records before. He knew exactly where Jason stood. As Daniel spoke, everything started to make sense. Jason's confidence. His need to impress. His smirk earlier that day. It wasn't just arrogance. It was fear of being exposed. Putting me in my place, humiliating me publicly, made him feel bigger. Daniel said he had stayed quiet because he didn't want to embarrass me or create drama at the wedding. But after seeing how I was treated, he realized Jason felt protected. Protected by my parents. Protected by the attention and praise he was getting. Daniel told me Jason had been lying not just about money, but about his role at work. He had made it sound like he was untouchable. Like no one could question him. Like he had power. Hearing this made my stomach turn. My parents had looked at Jason with pride all day. They had trusted him. They had defended him without question. Meanwhile, they had dismissed me like I was the problem. Daniel looked at me and said none of this was my fault. He said Jason's behavior now made sense. People who lie about who they are often try to control how others look, so no one notices the truth. I asked Daniel if Jason knew who he was. Daniel said yes. Jason knew exactly who he was dealing with. That knowledge made Jason's actions feel even colder. He wasn't just rude. He was calculated. Daniel told me he wasn't going to act out of anger. He said he believed in consequences, not scenes. He said the truth had a way of surfacing on its own, especially when someone built their life on lies. I sat there quietly, letting it all sink in. The wedding, the seating, the comments, the silence from my parents. It all connected to one simple truth. Jason had something to hide, and humiliating me was part of how he protected himself. The wedding ended, and we went home without saying much. I was exhausted, both physically and emotionally. Daniel didn't bring up Jason again that night. He let me rest. The next morning, he kissed my forehead and told me he had some work to take care of. His voice was calm, steady, like any other business day. Later, Daniel told me what happened. On the next business day, Jason was called into a formal meeting. It wasn't sudden or emotional. It followed company rules. Daniel didn't raise his voice. He didn't mention the wedding. He didn't mention me. He simply addressed Jason's work record. There had already been issues. Missed deadlines. False reports. Claims Jason made that didn't match documented facts. Problems that had been noted months before, long before the wedding ever happened. Jason had been given chances to correct them. He hadn't. Daniel said the meeting was short. Jason tried to talk his way out of it at first, confident like always. When that didn't work, his tone changed. He became nervous. He asked questions. He tried to negotiate. But there was nothing left to discuss. Daniel handed him the termination notice. Clear. Final. Professional. Jason didn't yell. He didn't argue much either. He went quiet. The confidence he had worn so easily disappeared. Daniel said Jason looked shocked, like he couldn't believe the protection he thought he had was gone. By the end of the day, Jason no longer had a job. I didn't feel happy when Daniel told me. I didn't cheer or celebrate. What I felt was something quieter. A sense that balance had been restored. Not because someone wanted revenge, but because actions had consequences. The phone started ringing that evening. My parents called first. Then they called again. And again. I didn't answer at first. When I finally did, my mother's voice was sharp and panicked. She asked what Daniel had done. She said Jason was in trouble. She said Emily was crying. She demanded an explanation. I told her I didn't know all the details. I told her Daniel handled his work matters professionally. She said it couldn't be a coincidence. She accused Daniel of holding a grudge. She said we were destroying Emily's future. My father called next. His tone was different, but the message was the same. He said family shouldn't do this to each other. He said mistakes happen and people deserve understanding. I listened quietly, noticing how easily they asked for grace when it benefited them. They didn't ask how I was. They didn't mention the rain. They didn't acknowledge the wedding at all. The calls kept coming over the next few days. Messages too. Concern, anger, blame, all mixed together. Jason's world had changed overnight, and suddenly my parents were desperate to fix it. Daniel stayed calm through all of it. He told me he didn't act out of emotion. He acted because it was right. He said Jason lost his job because of his own choices, not because of a wedding. For the first time, the people who ignored me were paying attention. Not to my pain, but to the consequences they never expected to reach them. A few days later, my parents asked us to meet. They said it was urgent. I already knew what it would be about. When Daniel and I arrived, the tension was heavy. No one asked how I was doing. No one apologized. They went straight to the problem. My father said Daniel needed to fix what he had done. He said Jason losing his job was too much, that it was affecting Emily's marriage. My mother nodded, saying this situation was embarrassing for the family. They spoke as if Daniel had acted out of spite, not responsibility. Emily finally spoke. Her eyes were red, but her voice was sharp. She said I had ruined her life. She said her marriage was starting under stress because of me. She accused me of being jealous and bitter. She said if I had just stayed quiet, none of this would have happened. I listened to all of it without interrupting. For once, I didn't feel small. I felt tired. Tired of swallowing words. Tired of being blamed for everything that went wrong. When they finished, I spoke. I told them I had spent my whole life being understanding. I reminded them of how I was always expected to adjust, to step back, to accept less so Emily could have more. I talked about how I was treated at the wedding. I described being placed away from family, left without cover, and ignored while it rained. The room went quiet. I told them that not one person checked on me. Not one apology came afterward. Instead, I was told to stop being dramatic. I said that moment made it clear where I stood with them. Emily tried to interrupt, but I continued. I said I was done begging to be treated like family. I said love shouldn't come with conditions or silence. I said respect isn't something you ask for again and again. My mother looked upset and said I was exaggerating. My father said I was bringing up the past. I told them the past mattered because it never changed. I looked at Daniel and then back at them. I said Daniel didn't ruin anything. Jason's choices led to his consequences. I said it wasn't my job to protect lies or comfort people who had no problem humiliating me. Emily started crying, saying I was selfish. For the first time, I didn't rush to comfort her. I stayed where I was. Calm. Clear. I told them I was done. Done explaining. Done adjusting. Done shrinking myself to keep peace. If they wanted a relationship with me, it would have to be based on honesty and respect. No one had an answer to that. We left shortly after. As we walked away, I felt something lift off my chest. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure. I had finally spoken the truth, and I wasn't taking it back. After that confrontation, I realized nothing was going to change. My parents weren't going to acknowledge how cruel they had been. Emily wasn't going to see what she had done. I had said everything I needed to say, and yet there were no apologies. I felt a strange mix of sadness and relief. Sad because they didn't care, relief because I had finally spoken my truth. Daniel and I talked quietly on the drive home. We didn't need to replay the arguments or the wedding. We just held each other and acknowledged that we were on the same side. For the first time, it felt like my life belonged to me, not to my family's expectations or judgments. We made a decision that day. We would step back. We would stop trying to get their approval or make them see reason. If they wanted to call or visit, it would be on our terms. If they wanted to treat me badly, I wouldn't be present to take it. It wasn't about revenge. It was about protecting ourselves and our peace. In the following weeks, I stopped answering their calls and messages. I didn't respond to Emily's texts either. Every attempt they made to pull me back into the drama, I let go. It wasn't easy. Old habits die slowly, and part of me missed them, despite everything. But every time I reminded myself of that day in the rain, every cruel smirk and dismissive word, I knew it was the right choice. Daniel supported me fully. He never judged me for the pain I had carried for years. He didn't try to force forgiveness. He simply helped me rebuild my confidence, my sense of self-worth, and my dignity. Together, we focused on our life, our home, our work, and our plans for the future. For the first time, I didn't feel the weight of their approval hanging over me. It wasn't about anger. It wasn't about holding grudges. It was about realizing a truth I had ignored too long: people who publicly humiliate you, who dismiss your pain, who make you feel small, they don't deserve your private loyalty. They don't deserve the energy, love, or attention you've been giving them for years. Over time, I stopped thinking about what I had lost. I stopped wishing they would change or see reason. Instead, I focused on what I had gained: freedom, clarity, and the knowledge that I could survive betrayal without losing myself. That was power I hadn't realized I possessed. I didn't get an apology. I didn't get a recognition of the suffering I endured. But I did get something far more important. I got my dignity back. I got my voice back. I got the peace of knowing I was no longer defined by their choices or their cruelty. As I look back now, I see that walking away wasn't quitting. It was choosing myself. It was choosing a life where I am respected and valued, not ignored or humiliated. And that choice, simple, quiet, and firm, became the turning point of my life. Daniel and I moved forward, hand in hand, dry at last, leaving the storm behind.